hours, Dan Hope and Andy Anders. And today we have another episode full of Ohio State versus Texas content. We have plenty of things to talk about as the week gets going here before a top 3 matchup between Ohio State and Texas. What we have in store today, just to kind of kick us off here, we have a beautiful week of weather ahead of us, guys. It's been beautiful in Columbus today. It will be beautiful in Columbus the rest of the week. What we have starting us off is a 67-degree kickoff on Saturday at noon. And then we have, by the end of the week or by the end of the game, it should be about 71 and sunny when the game ends. Are you guys excited for that weather?
Yeah, I'm loving it right now because I just moved into a new place this summer, and secret is being upstairs here in my area where we record these videos. It gets hot, heat rises. So some of those humid days in the summer, I'm sitting here worried about everybody gonna see me sweating all over the place here. But feeling better, feeling better up here today. Not quite as sweltering up here today. So loving the weather. It looks like it's going to be good for Saturday. We didn't know when we heard it was going to be the dreaded noon game. You're thinking it could be 100 degrees at kickoff, and everybody could be dying out there. But it seems like it's going to be pretty much a perfect day. It was a perfect night. I was out there, watched some high school football on Friday, so we're really getting perfect football weather right at the start of the season here.
Dan, you got to tell them, which game did you watch and who did you see win on Friday?
I saw
I'm just curious.
the Worthington Kilbourne Wolves. They played Watkins Memorial and Ohio State wide receiver commit Jaden Ricketts, and I think you would like me to let the viewers know that the Wolves got a 31-23 victory out there to start their season.
That's right. Worthington Kilbourne graduate here. Proud of my boys. Great win over a great team in Watkins. Andy, what you thinking about the weather for this week? I've had my windows open. I don't have them open right now because I don't know what sounds are going to come from my street, but it's been feeling pretty good in here where I've been recording today.
Yeah, my bearded dragon loves it. That's for sure. I take him outside for walks, put him on my shoulder, or I'll sit on my balcony and work on work stuff with him sitting there. He'll bask. He'll soak up the rays. But yeah, no, I've been loving the. It was pretty hot there for a while. It's kind of settled into right about optimal temperatures for this time of year, and Saturday is just going to be gorgeous. I'm very excited for that. It's people who read my stock report tomorrow. It's a sneak preview. It's as if the skies themselves are bracing for this huge game, this huge moment. I love that kind of story. And you look around the country too. I mean, LSU Clemson, you expect to be this giant, heated, sweaty mess at this time of year. Even that's supposed to be high 70s, I think. It's good weather across the country for the first full weekend of college football, not to discount week 0 too much. But love that. Love what's happening with the weather on Saturday.
We do need a little bit of cloud cover, though, because otherwise the three of us, we kind of sit right front middle in the press box. It's going to feel like it's about 100 degrees when the sun comes through those windows. They're not tinted windows. You get a full. I think I may have legitimately gotten sunburned one time in the front row of a press box. So certainly no complaining about being up a press box, but a little bit of cloud cover would be nice.
Yeah, Andy set the stage a little bit there for what's going to be a top 3 showdown in Columbus on Saturday. What we have is number 1 Texas, who's ranked number 1 in both the coaches and the AP poll. We have Ohio State number 2 in the coaches poll, number 3 in the AP poll. It's going to be a noon kickoff on Fox. I know Dan just actually released a story on our website that Fox and YouTube TV are in a dispute right now, so that might be some issues trying to get that game pulled up this weekend. We know that there have been disputes before going into college football seasons. Most notably, there was one between Spectrum and a couple of different outlets a couple of years ago that lagged into the season. We'll see if Fox and YouTube TV get that deal done before the game on Saturday. There are some alternative options to still watch the game if that deal hasn't been made, but we'll see. There's always money to be involved in these deals, and there's always people that are trying to strong arm each other into getting the better end of those deals. So as we approach Saturday, it will be a noon kickoff on Fox. For those that don't have YouTube TV, you guys will be fine to watch it. What we do have is a good reminder with the noon kickoff on Fox that we have a band noon kickoff shirt at 11 Warriors Dry Goods. It might be another reason to go buy that shirt when you're thinking about the dispute going on. But yeah, we have big noon kickoff that's going to be on campus. College game day is going to be on campus as well. I don't know if you guys have seen, Dan and Andy, that ESPN's been slowly rolling out some production pieces for Lee Corso's final episode of College game day, because Saturday will be his final appearance on College game day. The Corso's first ever headgear pick was the Brutus Buckeye, and he donned the Brutus Buckeye head on October 5th, 1996. I wasn't even born yet. Andy, you weren't born yet either, were you?
Nope.
It might have been Dan would be the only one, and even then he was still a little bit young for that.
Yeah, 3 or 4 years old.
That's right. So Ohio State 45-21 all time when appearing on game day, 19-6 when hosting ESPN's pregame show. What we know as of now is that game day is going to be near St. John Arena, where it typically is located, and then we're expecting that big noon will kind of park itself over by the RPAC to keep those two tailgates separate. Guys, what are you expecting for campus atmosphere on Saturday? It's the first game. It's going to be at noon. People are definitely going to have to get down there early to beat the traffic. I'm certainly excited to see the crowd show up on Saturday. What are you guys thinking?
Yeah, I'm thinking I got to be leave my place at 7 a.m. because I think it's going to be quite a bit of traffic on Saturday morning in Columbus. I think it'll be quite a spectacle on campus. Obviously a noon game is not the same as a night game, but I still think there's going to be a ton of energy on campus on Saturday morning. I mean, it's Ohio State, Texas. It's a top 3 game, and game day. I mean, it's easy after you've done this for a while to maybe not appreciate all the little moments as they happen. But I don't know what you guys I think it's super cool that we're going to be there for Lee Corso's final game on College game day. I mean, the guy is an institution. He has been one of the best in the business for decades. And to get to be there, to get to see him make his final headgear pick in person in Ohio Stadium, I think that's pretty damn cool.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on that. And, even as a kid growing up, I remember always watching the headgear picks. Game day was always a huge part of my game day traditions, especially in high school. I'd play a high school football game Friday night, get up Saturday morning and watch College game day, get ready for some football. If we didn't have some Saturday morning training, some Saturday morning recovery from the previous night, from practice. But yeah, the atmosphere is always something that I try to never take for granted with this job. I have just the environment, being in it. For me, ramp entry is always my moment during game day to take a breath, appreciate where my feet are, because the best damn band in the land, there's just nothing like that in terms of setting a college football atmosphere, from ramp entry through Script, Ohio, as so many fans watching this know and can identify with. And that energy, while I think this game definitely deserved to be a night game, should have been a night game, when I'm there on Saturday, it's going to do nothing. That's not going to be on my mind at all. It's just going to be appreciating the 105,000 that are going to be in the stands screaming. And I guess waving the towel now. They're handing out 100,000 of them. We'll see if it catches on.
Well, when it comes to the actual game itself, as we kind of have teased in the title and in the description of these videos, whether you're watching on YouTube and Facebook, we have some questions to ask. We have some matchups to watch. We have some players to watch for the actual game that will take place on the field Saturday. Steve Sarkisian had his press conference today, which Dan covered here for 11 Warriors. If you want to see some of his comments, go make sure to check that out in our articles on our front page. We'll have Ryan Day comments tomorrow for his press conference. And then we'll have some comments later in the week from some players. The captains will be speaking. It'll be Caleb Downs, Austin Sierraveld, Sonny Styles, and I'm drawing a blank on the fourth. Brandon Ennis. And then so we'll have those comments later in the week. But for right now, we're still kind of early in the week, but we're just kind of project forward. Dan, if you have a question approaching this game, this top 3 matchup between Ohio State and Texas, what would it be regarding either team?
Well, I know a question that I've been asked a lot, and I really haven't been able to answer a lot. I think even last week I was asked it on the show, was what is Matt Patricia's defense going to look like in this first game? I think that's one of the biggest questions on my mind, because we just don't know. All the practices where they've gotten into the nitty-gritty scheme stuff have not been open to the media, have not been open to the public. He did a lot of different things, changed his defense up a lot in New England. There's only 3 returning starters on the defense from last year. So we know they have a lot of talent on defense. It's a lot of unproven talent. But how is he going to utilize all these different pieces that he has? How is he going to utilize the potential for different lineups, whether that be, free safety looks, free corner looks, free linebacker looks, free down lineman with CJ Hicks rushing off the edge. There's a lot of different things that Matt Patricia is going to have the opportunity to do with the talent that he has on defense, even if a lot of it is unproven. And I think that's going to be one of the biggest things that I'm certainly going to be watching in this game because, we know all the hype around Arch Manning. We'll see if he lives up to that hype. But nevertheless, this Texas offense, no matter how you spin it, is one of the most talented offenses in the country. So Matt Patricia's defense is going to be put to the test right away. And we'll see if he's ready to answer that test.
Andy, any questions that you have going into this matchup?
Well, a lot, but to single it down on
Just a few.
one, just a few. There seems to be some new faces, both sides of the ball, new coordinators. Just a few things. But I think for me, I guess the biggest one is just Julian Sayin, right? Like, what does he look like in his first start? How ready is he to realize that 5-star potential, that number one quarterback in the class potential? Two quarterbacks playing each other in this game, taking over the reins of their programs for the first time. Arch Manning made 2 starts last season, but it's still Quinn Ewers' job ultimately. And that's a big storyline of this game is how do those two players look? But from Ohio State's perspective, Julian Sayin, we know the pieces around him are going to be phenomenal in terms of the guys he gets to throw to with Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate, Brandon Ennis, Max Clare. The running backs, even I would say, are at least they're not maybe not going to be Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins, but they're going to provide at least something to test the revamped interior of Texas's defensive line. The transfers they have there with a really bona fide and established interior. So, how does Julian Sayin coordinate those pieces around him, and how does he respond to whatever game plan Texas comes out with? If Texas is doing everything it can, and they don't have the same caliber of players in the secondary as they had last year, I don't think. But if Texas is able to come up with another game plan where they're constantly bracketing Jeremiah Smith and saying number 4 is not beating us, that's the one rule that we're going to have on defense. How does Julian Sayin respond to that? Can he process and go through multiple reads on a play when needed? Can he? They're going to throw tons of different coverages at him. I think you have to. Any defensive coordinator worth his salt, and you expect Patricia to do the same, is going to do everything they can to confuse a young quarterback making his first start. So we've heard positive things about Sayin's processing from Patricia, from others, ability to read defenses. I have no doubts about his arm talent, but all the fine points of quarterbacking are what are going to make this take this offense from its floor is already really good with the weapons it has. But if it's going to be great and if it's going to beat Texas, then Julian needs to be on point and avoid really costly mistakes, especially like multiple interceptions. There's a good chance you lose this game. Turning over the football is the number one way to swing a big game like this. So, yeah, it's all about Julian Sayin for me in terms of my top question. I have many more, but I'll leave it to that one for now.
Yeah, for me, I would look on the other team at the other position. I'm looking at Arch Manning. My question would be, is Arch Manning going to live up to the hype? I feel like gosh, it's been a couple of years now with Arch Manning committing a few years back and then kind of being a backup to Quinn Ewers for the past 2 seasons. We knew how much hype he had coming into college, but we haven't gotten to see him with that much or with that many circumstances or that many consequences in the games that he's played. It seems like when he's come into the game, it's been when Quinn Ewers has been hurt. The opponents maybe haven't been the stature that Ohio State is, the stature of the opponents that Arch Manning is going to face this season in a 12-game schedule, with 8 of those games being against SEC opponents. But this is a big test for him coming out. It feels that for as much as people have talked about Ohio State's inexperience at quarterback, they have talked about Arch Manning as being somebody that, they don't really mention the experience. He's somebody that overcomes it. He's somebody that they expect to overcome it. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing how he responds to the pressure coming in. He was asked a question at a press conference. It was either earlier this week or last week about if he's nervous to play in this game against Ohio State. And he said, he gets nervous when he's in the hotel room. Maybe he gets nervous on the bus ride over, but once he steps into the stadium, he feels comfortable and ready to play. So I'm curious to see if that's going to be true. I don't know if I necessarily think that him stepping into a stadium that's going to have 100,000 plus hostile fans, Ohio State fans that maybe didn't get a full day's worth of adult beverages in them, but have definitely been tailgating, as Dan said, getting down to campus at 7 or 8 a.m. and preparing for this game. I got to think that shakes a quarterback, especially one who hasn't made a significant start in his career to this point. So I'm looking at Arch Manning as somebody that is he going to live up to the hype? Is he going to be a player that can go out and perform well enough that he puts himself on the Heisman Trophy radar early?
He had another quote today too that's probably worth highlighting. He was asked about having a target on his back, and he said, I think we kind of try to shift the narrative. We're going for everyone else. The target's not on our back. We have a red dot on everyone else. So bold statement there from Arch Manning as he comes into Vishu this week.
Absolutely. And as I would think about that, you have to drum up within your locker room a narrative that you aren't the ones with the big target on the back, that you are the ones attacking. And we've seen Ryan Day do the same thing too, right? At Big Ten Media Days, when somebody said, what's Ohio State's mentality toward being the defending national champions? Ryan Day was very quick to say, we're not defending anything. Last year's team was the team that won the national championship. This is the team that's going to go out and attack and win another one. So I think that's definitely a mindset that is worth noting. And I do think that Arch Manning, if he has that kind of mindset, might come in with a little bit of an edge to perform well. And I think that he definitely knows that the noise around him is one that he needs to deliver, even if his first start is coming against a top 3 team like Ohio State. If we move forward to the matchups, we have both matchups and players to watch, but this will be broad enough where you could mention a few players here, Dan. We're kicking this off. What's a matchup that you are looking for early in this week as Ohio State and Texas prepare for their game?
Yeah, I think one of the pivotal matchups in this game is going to be how do Ohio State's offensive tackles fare against Texas's edge rushers. We've talked a lot about Austin Searveld. There's a lot of hype behind the guy, but he's never played tackle in a collegiate game. Now his first game is going to be going up against a preseason All-American edge rusher in Colin Simmons. So it's kind of like Donovan Jackson last year against Penn State. He's going to get thrown into the fire. We saw Donovan Jackson have a couple whiffs against Abdul Carter, but all in all, he did well enough that Ohio State was able to battle to a close win in that game. Can Austin Searveld give Ohio State the same kind of play on Saturday? They might need him to. And then on the other side, we think Phillip Daniels is probably going to be the starting right tackle. Maybe Ethan Anianwa gets in there as well. Maybe they rotate. We'll see if we get any more clarity on that tomorrow during Ryan Day's press conference. But you've had kind of an ongoing competition there at right tackle. You've got a guy at left tackle who was a backup guard last season. So to me, both sides of a line there, I'm circling them. They're under a microscope. Texas has some really good pass rushers. How well they can hold the edge and protect Julian Sayin is going to be crucial for whether or not Ohio State wins this game.
Andy, what matchup are you watching as you approach this week?
Yeah, to me, the answer to this one's easy, and there's a lot of interesting matchups in this game, of course, but the Ohio State defensive line versus the Texas offensive line, 8 of the 9 starters on Saturday will be new starters in that matchup. And you all know, I say it all the time, it's an old football cliche. Whoever wins in the trenches wins the game. Football is decided in the trenches. And both of them are interesting cases because I feel like the situation is very similar on both sides of the ball, where not only are you replacing a lot, but you have guys who do have experience for both teams, right? Kenyatta Jackson Jr. and Caden Curry have been the primary backups for Ohio State for multiple seasons, then get their starting opportunity. Bo Atkinson, who I think we expect to be the third defensive end in for Ohio State, had a lot of experience at North Carolina last year as a starter, 7.5 sacks, but won't be one of those starters, we don't think, this Saturday. Texas, its offensive line, yes, only one returning starter from last year, DJ Campbell, but they have 2 guys with a lot of experience also there. Cole Hudson at center and Trevor Gooseby at left tackle, guys who have played, guys who have started a few games, if not more. just not returning starters from last year and what was one of the best offensive lines in the country, a finalist for the Joe Moore Award, before at least Jack Sawyer made them look a little silly in the final minutes of the Cotton Bowl. But that matchup to me is maybe, if I were to pinpoint one that decides this game, uh, that because Texas is going to want to establish the ground game with Arch Manning's athleticism, with Quintravion Wisner coming back, who had 1,000 yards rushing last year, is going to obviously want to protect Arch, and pressure is going to be essential to slowing down the Texas offense and making sure he's uncomfortable. Football, again, won and lost in the trenches. I am all full focus on that battle and how real is this Ohio State defensive line in replacing four starters.
You guys both went to the trenches with your matchups to watch, and I think that was a smart play. Didn't really leave me with too many matchups to actually watch left over, though. So I had to go with this, and it goes in line with what I brought up earlier about Arch Manning. I'm looking at Ohio State's secondary versus Manning and Texas's pass catchers. Texas brings back some guys that have had decent seasons, but none of the guys that obviously are putting up the same numbers as a Jeremiah Smith, a Carnell Tate, and what you would expect Brandon Inniss to be able to achieve this season as the third pass catcher. Ryan Wingo, you have Emmett Mosley, you have Parker Livingstone, a couple of exciting freshmen with Jamie French being the notable guy that I know Ohio State was pursuing for a long time in his recruitment process. But how does Davison Igbinosun, how does Jermaine Matthews Jr., Lorenzo Styles Jr., some of those guys hold up when facing a guy coming in with the amount of hype as Arch Manning? As you mentioned, Andy, he's an athletic guy. He can extend plays. He can escape the pocket. If Ohio State's pass rush isn't able to get home against Texas's offensive line, the new look offensive line, are those guys going to be able to cover long enough to keep Arch Manning from finding a rhythm in this game? You obviously have a guy like Caleb Downs who's able to anchor the back end of the defense. We'll see whether or not Matt Patricia and Ohio State's defensive coaching staff elect to use Jalen McLean more on the back end, or Malik Harford, if those guys are going to be rotating. So we're going to see what they're capable of against what should be a high-powered offense, what should be probably a top 10 offense when all things are said and done this season, if Arch Manning is who everyone thinks he can be. I do want to ask this question. It'd be a good time to kind of work in this question from one of our fans, considering what we just talked about, Dan, when you also answered with your question about Matt Patricia and what his defense may deploy this season. We had a question from our forum where we had winning for lack of a better word is good, a long username on our website, but a good username. He was asking about, in the semifinal last year, Texas completed 11 passes to running backs for 101 yards and 2 touchdowns. They have at least 2 dangerous running backs, again, in Quintravion Wisner and CJ Baxter. Do you guys think that they will rely on this part of their passing game again in this season opener? And how could Ohio State prepare for that kind of game plan?
Yeah, I'll jump in on this one. Steve Sarkisian is known for that. That's always going to be a part of his offense. Running back screens, misdirection, getting them involved in the passing game has always been a trademark of a Sark offense. So don't expect that to go anywhere for Texas. How does Ohio State game plan to that? Either you find favorable matchups to run man coverage with. I think Sonny Styles, far enough along in his career, the safety background. I know he got burnt on a wheel route in the Cotton Bowl. The second one was not his fault, I will say, but the first one was. At least from what it seemed on tape. I don't have back end knowledge of Ohio State scheme, but that based off the coverage, it was his responsibility. If you're going to have him, you can just say, hey, you're assigned to him in man coverage. Get like whatever you do, stick to Quintravion Wisner. And I think Sonny Styles has the athleticism to make those plays when he's prepared for that responsibility. When you're in zones, is a lot of the times when those guys can get lost and you don't have that guy assigned to it. Or, Texas can do some things to try and free up the running backs. I think that's the important thing, is just having the wherewithal when you're in that outside zone against a wheel route, being able to pass him off in coverage. When if it's a screen, that's really just, again, diagnosing. And I think guys like Caleb Downs, guys who have seen it before, will be able to blow up those plays in a lot of scenarios. So I think really when you think back to the Cotton Bowl and what hurt Ohio State mainly, it was those two big wheel routes that Texas had touchdowns on. And I think I would expect them to be a little more prepared for that this time, to pass it off better in zone coverage. And again, all else fails, I think you could stick one of your linebackers, and Arvell Reese is a physical freak too. We've talked about it, heard about it a lot. Stick one of those to that guy in man coverage.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like from an Ohio State perspective, you have to understand that Steve Sarkisian is one of college football's best play callers. Ryan Day earns that distinguishment as well, and has earned that reputation both from his time as an offensive coordinator at Ohio State and then also as a head coach when he was lead play caller. Steve Sarkisian has that kind of reputation as well. There are going to be plays that Texas is going to get on Ohio State in this game, and I think it really will be a matter of how much can you limit the explosives? How much have we had that conversation over the past few years about an Ohio State led defense, about limiting explosives, about keeping plays in front? I do think that this will be an opportunity that Texas tries to take advantage of because they have some need to get Arch Manning established in a road environment and in an environment where there's going to be 100,000 fans calling out against him, cheering against him. So why not try and get some short passes and some completions to your running backs who are going to have matchups with linebackers, maybe even the tight end too. On the flip side, I would expect
My only advice for Sark is don't run a toss for a 7-yard loss at the 1 yard line.
That's right.
Yeah, on the one
That's
yard
right.
line, yeah.
Well, and honestly, one of the things that I found very insightful about Jones's film study from earlier this week, or actually it might have been from last week on Caleb Downs, was just how impressive Caleb Downs and Lathan Ransom were on that play. I mean, the study and the ability to know exactly where that play was going before it was even called, before the ball was even snapped. Caleb Downs shot out like a cannon in that direction. So he might just be a cheat code that can break down any of those walls. But to get us back on track, thank you for your question. Winning, for lack of a better word, is good. I will remember that username for next time. We're going to move on to players to watch. We have addressed the questions, some matchups to watch, players to watch now as we go forward into this game. Dan, who are you looking at as the player to watch on Saturday?
I'm going to reach real deep into the bag and find a player and nobody knows about, and I'm going to go with Jeremiah Smith. Andy mentioned earlier that Texas really made a concerted effort to bracket him last year. They were basically the only team that was successful at slowing down Jeremiah Smith last year, holding him to just one catch for 3 yards. Will they try to do that again? I'm sure they will. I'm going to go ahead and say it's not going to matter. I'll make a bold prediction right now. Jeremiah Smith, over 100 yards, 2 touchdowns.
Wow. I mean, honestly, it seems like if anyone can call their shot, it's Jeremiah Smith. And it seems like he was really upset about last year's game and the way that it went. I think he's happy Ohio State won, obviously, because then it gave them the opportunity to go win the national championship. But when we talked about it with him during the preseason, it seems like he's ready to make a statement. So it sounded a little bit surprising coming off your lips, Dan, but now that I'm thinking about it more, I could definitely see that happening.
Yeah, and I would add too, like it doesn't surprise me. I think I'd put Jeremiah in a similar territory, even though I again think they're going to roll some of the same coverages, do some of the same things. The two players doing that to him primarily in that game are gone now. They're in the NFL. One of them being a Thorpe Award winner, like literally probably the best cornerback in the country, Jahdae Barron, who was a first round NFL draft pick. So they don't have the same bodies. And I think Jeremiah is going to be better than last year. Like it's again, I've been saying it all offseason. I know it's hard to fathom, but there is still plenty, as Jones put it, you mentioned Jones earlier, plenty of runway for Jeremiah and an incredibly technically refined player out of high school already. But being an Iron Buckeye twice again this offseason, making more physical changes, getting bigger, stronger, faster, as Ryan Day put it. Plus, more technical refinement is going to come. Like for guys that start as a freshman, that freshman to sophomore year leap is always huge. And again, it's hard to quantify a huge freshman to sophomore year leap, but I think the combination of that, like Jeremiah Smith is going to be better this year than he was last year. I'm pretty confident in that statement. And Texas no longer has a Thorpe Award winner to help bracket him. I like that prediction from Dan, I think. For me, my player to watch also in the receiver room is Brandon Innes. Uh, 5-star guy, always loved the athleticism, loved the mentality, being a captain, being a consistent vocal leader. Talked about as the biggest trash talker in the Ohio State receiver room, right? Like that guy that's going to bring some energy. But for Julian, talked about Julian earlier at quarterback, the guys closest to a new starter are usually the ones that are going to get the most attention. And so I almost went with Max Clare for this reason, who could provide some matchup problems, certainly with Ohio State's, with Texas's linebackers and the like. But for me, I think Ennis is going to get a lot of targets, especially if Texas is able to slow down Jeremiah Smith. Not that we think that's going to happen this time, but if they are, Brandon Ennis being that closer guy to the quarterback, being that slot receiver, I think like he gives a lot of Garrett Wilson comparisons. I think that's fair, but I also think like back to what Jackson Smith and Jigbo was, right? With providing that consistent option to dump the ball off to in a lot of games, and then he had the explosion against Utah. But Ennis has fantastic athleticism in the open field. You saw that on his punt returns. He's going to be a reliable option closer to the quarterback as Julian Sayin gets settled in. So for me, that makes him a huge player to watch in this game.
Yeah, for me, it's the player that Andy mentioned he almost selected, and that would be Max Clare. I do think in similar lining that Andy mentioned that if Jeremiah Smith is someone that Texas decides to take away, whether or not they can take him away is really the most important question I think of this game. I know we didn't mention it earlier, but I do think that whether or not you can neutralize the number one player in the country is going to be what determines the outcome of this game. If in some way Texas is able to slow down Jeremiah Smith, it will then be up to guys like Carnell Tate and Brandon Innes and Max Clare to step up and to be able to win their one-on-one matchups. I loved the way that Max Clare responded last week when a reporter asked him, basically, how does it feel knowing that you are not going to be double teamed, not going to be triple teamed as playing for Ohio State instead of Purdue? And he just had a ear to ear grin, being excited about the opportunity to have one-on-one matchups that he can win. And I believe it was Bennett Christian last week who said Max Clare is the best route running tight end he's ever seen. And so to know that he has that kind of reputation coming into this game, the kind of one-on-one matchups that he should receive, and knowing that Julian Sayin's a quarterback looking to get comfortable. I don't know where this, kind of line of thinking came. It's probably well established statistically somewhere, but it tends to be that a newer quarterback is going to rely on his tight ends and on his running backs to get comfortable early on in his starting tenure. It's probably because they run the shortest routes. It's probably because they're over the middle. They're the most visible players at all times. But I do think that Max Clare is a guy who's going to get Julian Sayin comfortable in this football game if it's not going to be Jeremiah Smith, because I think that security blanket over the middle is an area of the field that Ohio State's going to look to exploit. And I think that it could be a great opportunity for him to kind of establish himself to have a welcome to Ohio State moment in front of what should be one of the most rowdy crowds the season will see at the Horseshoe. Another player I would mention, and I'd be curious to hear your guys' thoughts on this for what this duo might look like in the game in the season opener, would be James Peoples. And then if we want to include too, CJ Donaldson. I'm curious to see what the running back room is going to look like in this season opener. I know that Carlos Loughlin and Ryan Day have expressed excitement for what Bo Jackson can do. I'm not exactly sure you're going to be, chomping at the bit to put a true freshman into a game against the number one team in the country. So it seems like it might be a James Peoples and CJ Donaldson show in the season opener. But what do you guys think about those two running backs in tandem and what they might be able to accomplish against that Texas defense? Because I think those could be two players to watch as well.
Andy?
Oh yeah, I'm as high on James Peoples as anyone, and I think this will be very much be a ride the hot hand situation. I you're going to want to mix those guys in to keep each other fresh. They've shown that that's the strategy at running back, that it worked for them last year. It's kind of the new way of doing things in this era of football. You want two guys that are working in tandem, but James Peoples has the higher ceiling to me. I think that if he gets going the right way, he's got the vision, he's got the burst, He's got the nice side to side mobility. Like we've made the J.K. Dobbins comparison consistently. And that also just like the legs never stop churning. That's what I have enjoyed the opportunities we've had to watch James Peoples run. He's a guy who always keeps his feet moving through contact, knows how to finish runs in that way. And so, where is he at in terms relative to his ceiling? CJ Donaldson, how much does the weight loss influence his running style? And is there another level he can get to? Because his 2 years of production at West Virginia were very consistent, right? Both years he was 4.5 to 4.7 yards per carry, around 800 yards total, exactly 11 touchdowns both seasons. Not a guy who's going to fumble a lot, kept took care of the rock there, which is something you want in this game. But um, I think it's going to very much be a ride the hot hand situation where if one of them gets going with the offense, really clicks with the offensive line and gets downhill, you're going to see that guy play more in this game. And to your point, while we heard Bo Jackson lumped in with those other two, at least implied by Ryan Day, who said there are three running backs Ohio State feels comfortable playing. Didn't name who, but you can infer Bo Jackson is the third one. Um, I do think we won't see much of him in this game, but is a guy that I would expect over the course of the season to get more and more usage potentially if he earns that in practice. And the other thing I love about James Peoples is watching clips of him in pass pro and seeing him doing some of those finer points of the game that I think are going to warrant more inclusion in the game plan for a game like this where all of that is going to matter. So for me, I expect this to be more of a James Peoples game just because I think he's got that ceiling. But again, riding the hot hand, I think is the way Ohio State's going to go in this
Got a question here from Brutus Buckeye. We'll start moving into the fan questions because I think this might move into a little bit bouncing off of what Andy had said from the running backs and what kind of performance we might see from them for Ohio State to have success. But Brutus Buckeye 85 asked in our forum, what kind of performance do you think we will need to see from Julian Sayin in order for Ohio State to win this Saturday? I'll go with you, Dan. What do you think Julian Sayin needs to do for Ohio State to come out with a victory?
I think the biggest thing is he's going to need to be efficient. I think first and foremost, can't have costly turnovers. You cannot afford to have a bad interception or a bad fumble that gives Texas the ball in Ohio State territory. These are the kind of games. I mean, Steve Sarkisian mentioned it in his presser earlier. These are the kind of games where the other team's going to capitalize if you make mistakes. So you have to minimize mistakes. I mean, we saw that last year. The game all swung on a turnover, that, of course, being Jack Sawyer's scoop and score. And so I think that's the number one thing. I mean, Ryan Day's harped on it all preseason camp is ball security. Take care of the football. I think that's the number one thing. It's always kind of hard to look at like stats because, I mean, you think back to like CJ Stroud's second game as Ohio State quarterback. I think he threw for over 400 yards and they lost to Oregon. So, like, it's not always about stats. It's more about efficiency. But when I think about this game, my feeling is the winner of this game is going to be in the high 20s in terms of points. And so I think that means if you're Julian Sayin, you're going to need to lead 4 to 5 effective drives that, result in points for Ohio State. And so, I think it's going to be, more often than not, can he put together a successful drive? I think that's really what it's going to come down to in terms of if it's good enough for Ohio State to win this game. I mean, obviously, based on my bold prediction before, I'm predicting at least 2 touchdown passes for Julian Sayin because I said Jeremiah Smith is going to score 2 touchdowns. I was going to say, I'll say he throws 2 touchdowns. Like, I'll say he throws 2 touchdowns. They're both to Jeremiah. Yardage, I don't really know. But like I said, I think it's more about efficiency. I think he needs 4 or 5 good drives that, get Ohio State deep into Texas territory, ideally resulting in either a touchdown or a field goal. And I think he needs to avoid any backbreaking turnovers.
Andy, any thoughts on what Julian Sayin needs to do on Saturday for Ohio State to come out with a win?
Yeah, nothing much to add to what Dan said. I pretty much agree with all of it. It's just about distributing the ball and being able to process defenses, right? Is still the number one question I have with Sayin with all of his physical gifts is he ready to make the right decisions with the football, avoid those turnovers, throw it away when he has to, those things that I'm sure Ryan Day is going to bring up a lot, but they're cliches for a reason. That's what I think is ultimately, like Day said, score one more point than the other team. Whatever's got to be done to get that done.
I think a good number to keep in mind for Ohio State fans going into Saturday is 40. I think if Ohio State gets to the Texas 40-yard line, I feel pretty confident Ryan Day is going to call for a shot to the end zone for Jeremiah Smith in either the left corner or the right corner, because I think whether or not he's covered by two guys, you might as well give him the chance to go up and get it. And I think if Ohio State gets one touchdown out of Jeremiah Smith, you might as well go for him for two, as Dan has mentioned. It's just kind of it's a matter of getting the lid off the hoop, so to speak, and just getting the ball rolling to Jeremiah Smith and just letting him loose. I'll ask this question moving forward. I think this might be a good one to kick off with Andy, knowing his love for the offensive line and for the trenches. Northberg put in our forum that there's been little talk about new offensive line coach Tyler Bowen this offseason. How is he meshing with Ryan Day? How is he meshing with his players in his first year with the Buckeyes?
Yeah, I mean, all sign everything we hear is good, right? That's gonna happen. Like you're not gonna hear a head coach publicly talk down his assistants or a player publicly talk down his coach, but I think I like what they did in terms of structuring multiple offensive line coaches, bringing in the guys they did, Marcus Johnson, Charlie Dickey, to help coach up that group, give it more individual attention, knowing the new faces that are there with some experience, but new starters, right? From at least the first group of guys, the first and second group of guys Ohio State ran out last season. Um, I think Tyler Bowen has also seemed to bring some good input to the running game as a former offensive coordinator himself to Brian Hartline. And as he adjusts to that as a first time play caller, kind of getting some of that schemes in his head, because obviously Brian's going to have a really advanced knowledge of the passing game, but having some of that input from Tyler Bowen, I think, has been helpful in terms of a game planning thing. Um, we've heard nothing but positive things again from the offensive linemen and how they're meshing, but really it's hard to judge that until you see the results. Like development, it's offensive line is one of the most developmental positions in football. It's so critical how things mesh over the course of the year. You look at both of Ohio State's last two national championship runs, 2014 and 2024. They don't win those without fantastic development on the offensive line. 2014, how bad they looked in the early weeks and the loss to Virginia Tech and how it built throughout the season until they were eventually one of the best offensive lines in the country there. The coaching job for all of Ed Warner's later failures at Ohio State, the coaching job he did that year was so fantastic. And then the same again in 2024 for Justin Fry, all the flack he caught throughout his Ohio State tenure, all the misses on the recruiting trail, to have the number of guys they had ready to go. Donovan Jackson sliding out to play tackle, being ready for that. Carson Hinsman recovering from some disappointments at center in his past to fill that role with Seth McLaughlin. Went down the depth between Austin Sierreveld and Luke Montgomery at guard, and Carson Hinsman too, because he played guard for a couple of games. Like offensive line development is something that is going to be very apparent over the course of the season. It's going to bear out over the course of the season for Ohio State. So early returns are going to be positive, I think, because players and coaches are going to talk up the coaches. But it's for me, it's very much wait and see on Tyler Bowen when it comes to the development of this offensive line.
It kind of feels like one of those things where no news is good news. Like the fact that you're not hearing about Tyler Bowen is probably a good thing if you're an Ohio State fan, mostly because you're hearing more about the players. You're hearing more about Austin Sierreveld and the incredible offseason that he had as a two-time Iron Buckeye and becoming a captain. You're hearing about Phillip Daniels, and so many players have called Phillip Daniels a dog this preseason. I feel like I've heard the dog counter on Phillip Daniels being higher than any other player in the Ohio State linebacker or a lineman room and the locker room in general. And then I've also seen a different kind of edge too with Luke Montgomery and Carson Hinsman going into this season. I think that they're excited to be firmly established as consistent guys in the rotation, starting and being guys that everyone can rely on. Taker Shabola as well, who came back with a lot of different starting experience as well. So I think that Tyler Bowen, as you mentioned, Andy, I'm excited to see also too the ways that he will help Brian Hartline in his first season as a play caller for Ohio State, and the ways that they can work together in tandem to create a game plan for Ohio State. This is a question from Chase Brown, me, the host, not from one of our readers. Just one that I was thinking
What's your
about
username, Chase?
My username. I wish I had one creative off the top of my head. I would pay something in homage to maybe Tank. I think I know a guy named Tank that used to be in our forum. So maybe Tank Lover 55, something like that. I do think that Ohio State, going into this game, there's often conversation about how much of a script coaches will create for a game, and how many plays coaches have just pre-planned going into a game before eventually they run out of those plays, and then they start playing against their opponent for what they're seeing in the actual game itself. What do you guys think about that going into this? Dan, I'll start with you. Do you think that Ryan Day and Brian Hartline are going to have a well-established script coming into this thing, or do you think that there's going to be an opportunity for Brian Hartline and Ryan Day to kind of work collaboratively pretty early on in this thing?
It's kind of a delicate balance going into a season opener like this, because on one hand, you've had 7+ months to game plan for this game. So you had all this time to draw up all these great plays and cook up all these different things, but you don't know exactly what the other side is going to look like, because they've also had 7 months to cook things up for this game. I mean, Texas, they had 10 extra days. They lost to Ohio State, and they started preparing for this one knowing their next game was going to be against the same team they just lost to. And so both coaching staffs have spent a lot of time preparing for this specific game, coming up with different plays and scripts for this specific game. But you have to be ready to adjust very quickly within the game. You can't have such a long script that then if it doesn't work, you stick to it. I mean, you think about the game that ended last year's regular season. That would be a good example of having a script that did not work. The Ohio State Michigan game, of course, I'm talking to, and running the ball 25 times up the middle at 2 top 15 defensive tackles. Don't think that's going to happen again. But the point is, you got to be able to think on your feet. This is going to be a big test for Brian Hartline. This is going to be Brian Hartline's first time calling plays as Ohio State's offensive coordinator, and you don't get a much bigger stage than this. We won't necessarily know, like, from watching the game, whether you're on TV or us in the press box, but like, let's say things are rocky at first. How much leash does Ryan Day give Brian Hartline? Does he stay hands off and trust Hartline to dig him out of it? Or does he jump in, take over, and say, no, we got to change this, and this? It's going to be fascinating to see how does Brian Hartline's first game go as offensive coordinator, because you're going up against a defense that has 3 preseason All-Americans and Colin Simmons, Anthony Hill Jr., Michael Taft, and you're doing it with a quarterback who threw 12 passes last year. So there's a lot to watch for with this offense, and I think certainly Ryan Day and Brian Hartline will have some creative things cooked up in that script, but they also have to be nimble and adaptable.
I wouldn't discount too Matt Patricia's influence on Brian Hartline as well. There was a podcast appearance that Patricia had like right before Ohio State hired him. He was on Julian Edelman's podcast.
A 3-hour podcast, by the way.
A 3-hour podcast. And at one point when they were discussing recently hired Ohio State assistant Josh Boyer, Matt Patricia was kind of going through his game planning process. And he said at the beginning of a week, he would have about 800 plays. It was probably a booklet the size of a Cheesecake Factory menu. That's how many plays were on that thing. And then throughout the week, he would slowly start chopping away, cropping away at whatever it was in his playbook that he didn't think would maybe fit the scheme of either what his team was trying to accomplish that week or whatever they were trying to negate from the other team that they were facing, to maybe it got down to, I don't know, maybe 80 to 100 plays. You cut it down that much. So I wonder how much that influence has made, or how much of an influence Patricia has made on Hartline in that regard as well, coming in with an abundance of plays that maybe you can trim down, as opposed to maybe coming in with little and then trying to expand as the game goes on. Andy, you looked like you maybe were going to add something there too. What were you thinking?
Yeah, I mean, a few thoughts. For one thing, I think there's a lot of different ways to skin a cat when it comes to game planning. A lot of different approaches to take, a lot of different structures and systems that guys have. And who knows what Hartline's approach is. I think, first off, Dan mentioned you don't know exactly what you're going to get from Texas's defense. For most of the offseason as Ohio State, you're trying to figure out exactly what you're going to get from the offense. Like you, I've said it dozens of times throughout, everything, and it's something that a lot of football fans will agree with is you don't design a scheme and then force your players into the scheme. You design a scheme around your players. And so while it's still going to be the Ryan Day offense, you're going to see a lot of the same concepts that Ryan Day has run throughout his tenure. Um, just going to be Brian Hartline coming up with the game plan, calling those plays, doing those, taking the lead on that. It's going to be structured around the strengths of what Ohio State has, what Julian Sayin does well, what the offensive line ultimately does well, like where they feel they have the matchups in this game. And that's hard to determine and establish until even within a few weeks of the game. So, I think that's more where you haven't really, the scheme comes together in the last few weeks, even though you had 7 months to know this game was going to happen. And I think, as it pertains to scripts specifically, usually it's around 10 to 15 plays. You have a structure that is going to get you through the first drive, maybe the second drive. But like Dan said, from there it is usually reacting to what's actually happening in the game, what you're actually seeing on the field, what they're adjusting to, what you're adjusting to, what you're seeing, what they're seeing, what you think they're going to, all this stuff, what their game plan clearly has been coming in against you. And, in a failure like the Michigan game, a lot of the times it's just highlighting the wrong things in the game plan. Like you said, pounding your head between the tackles 25 times. I doubt all those runs were scripted. I doubt half of them were scripted, but that was seemed to be, for whatever reason, their game plan coming in was thinking that. And I think Will Howard's concussion also maybe influenced it. Not to reminisce on that game too much. I know that's a sore memory for a lot of people, but the thing in this game is going to be coming in with a concrete game plan of how do we accentuate what we believe are our strengths, having that organization throughout the week, and then ultimately, yes, adjusting on the fly and having that communication, that process with Brian Hartline. And in terms of the leash, Dan mentioned it's a great point. I think if I'm Ryan Day, the 12-team playoff actually allows me to have more of a leash. If Brian Hartline is going to be my play caller this season, I want to see him work through those hiccups. If he comes out slow, if the offense comes out bad, not that you want him to have that happen, but I think Ryan has the wisdom to see how he responds because ultimately, if Ohio State loses this game, yes, they want to win it more than anything, but if Ohio State loses this game, it's not the end of any of their goals for the 2025 season. So I expect there to be some runway to make mistakes. And I think Ryan has even emphasized that point when talking about Julian Sayin and saying, hey, I want you to just go out there and let it fly. Ultimately, make the right decisions with the football, but you've trained for this. You've been bred for this for a long time. And it's the same with Hartline, who's learned in the Ryan Day offense for 8 years now. You just got to put the trust in your guys and let it rip out there sometimes. And I think that's the mentality Ryan Day has expressed thus far. We'll see if it applies Saturday. Um, but personally, I do think Ryan Hartline has the tools to be a great play caller. And if it doesn't click Saturday, I expect it to click at some point this season.
I'll get us out of here on this question. It's Monday. We have 5 more sleeps until Saturday. If you have a score prediction for Saturday's game, subject to change, I won't hold you to it on Saturday afternoon. What are you picking for the final score on Saturday? I'll start with you, Dan.
You want people to get mad at me earlier in the week, right?
That's right. That's right.
All right. Right now, I have Texas 27, Ohio State 24.
If you would like to provide any explanation to that, just to keep them off your back a little bit, you can. Or if you just want to leave it vague, that's also good too.
You know what? I just think that, I think there's going to be some growing pains for Ohio State. And we just talked about it. You got 2 new coordinators. You got a lot of new starters. I think we talked about a little bit last week. Arch Manning is a new starter, but he does have more experience than Julian Sayin does. I just think there's enough factors to me. I'll have a piece at some point this week kind of looking at how the 2 rosters compare to each other. And I think it tilts a little bit in Texas's direction, not drastically, but I think just in terms of players they have who weren't necessarily starters, but have more experience playing within Texas's system. I think Texas has a little bit more of that. I mean, I think, you just look at historic parallels. I mean, it's hard to defend a national championship, and it's a long season, and Ohio State could be the best team in the country at season's end, but I don't personally think Ohio State is going to be the best team in the country at the start of a season, and they've got the number one team in the country coming to town. So I expect a close game. I expect a great game, but as I sit here right now, I've got Texas by 3.
Andy, what's your prediction for Saturday?
It's funny. I run our staff score predictions every year, and when Dan sent me his prediction today, I said, "Of course, we have the same score," because I am also taking Texas 27-24 in this game. Um, that's to provide some levity because I know now Dan, we're going to split the hate on this one for the people that watch this and say we're not pumping enough sunshine. It is so rare that I pick against Ohio State, but I've said it all off season. I think a lot of people underestimate the impact of 2 new coordinators and how long it takes for new systems to click. Even though it's still going to be the Ryan Day offense, even though Ohio State's base defense will be the same, it's still going to be a 4-2-5. Like just adjusting to the new schemes, the new play calling, the new communications, all the new things that go into having a new coordinator, a new person calling the plays on both sides of the ball. I think with the new faces, like we've talked about all offseason that Ohio State has, and Texas has plenty of them too, which is why I'll say this. I can see this game going in any number of directions. I don't feel confident. I don't think I would have felt confident in any score for this game because there is so much newness, so much that I don't know exactly the impact. Like, how much is the crowd going to play into this? Maybe with so many new starters up front, new quarterback for Texas, if they've got to move to a silent count, how are they going to respond to that? Um, there's a lot of factors in this game. Could it be really sloppy out of the gate, and not this we're expecting this big clash of titans, but it's week 1. Is there going to be a bunch of penalties? Is there going to be turnovers? There's so many factors, especially in the trenches. We talked about the pass rush for Texas and matching up with Ohio State's offensive tackles. The questions there. I talked about Texas O-line versus Ohio State D-line. On the interior of Ohio State's O-line too, Texas at defensive tackle is relying mostly on transfers and unknown pieces there for their scheme. And did they properly address that defensive tackle position? If Ohio State gets an inside ground game going in this game with 3 starters on the interior offensive line who have college football playoff experience, that can totally shift the outlook of the game if they get a ground game established with the weapons they have out wide. So there's any number of directions I could see this game going, but I am taking Texas because it's just what my gut's telling me with the 2 new coordinators.
Man, I love going last.
You
Every time I get
to
to go last, I get to be the good guy.
Well, you can't pick Texas because we can't do the thing where we all pick the same. We all pick against them, and then Ohio State wins.
We can't get the
right.
graphic
the score graphic
and everyone.
Yeah. Well, I would say, even without knowing your guys' predictions, I still feel confident about Ohio State's chances in this game. I don't know if I let Bill Connolly's SP Plus projections influence too much of my mindset going into any number of games. I probably do. I have more of an analytical mind than I would like to admit, but his prediction for this game was Ohio State 27, Texas 20, and I like that score. I really do. I think right now the line is positioned at Ohio State as a 1.5 point favorite, with the over-under being set around 47.5. So that would be right at the number. I probably would see it a little bit closer. I like the 27-24 score that you guys mentioned, maybe flipping that in Ohio State's favor. I just think when it comes down to it, you have the 2 best players in college football. Is it possible that Ohio State is able to lean on those 2 guys enough that they make enough plays in this football game to lead Ohio State to a victory? Football is one of the unique sports where having one of the best players, if not the best player on the field, is sometimes not enough. Sometimes it's so much of a team-oriented game that just doesn't make a difference. But you have the guys that are transcendent in the way that Jeremiah Smith and Caleb Downs are, and having those 2 guys on either side of the football for Ohio State, I like their chances to come out on top in this game. And I do think that the home field advantage will play a factor. I do think that Ohio Stadium at its best is one of the toughest places to play in college football. The issue that Ohio State runs into sometimes, though, whether it was the Oregon game a couple of years ago that Dan mentioned, or whether it's been a couple of the recent matchups against Michigan, Ohio Stadium does have a propensity sometimes to be a little bit. The best way I can describe it is that it's either the best stadium in the world or the worst stadium in the world, because
If things
it's
go
either
bad early, the energy can get sucked out
exactly
real
right.
quick. People
Yeah.
get nervous.
Exactly right. And it suddenly turns into, instead of 100,000 people cheering for you and are on your side, it's 100,000 people that you could hear a pin drop in the stadium, because that's all the sets of eyeballs that are looking at you and waiting for you to break them free of this anxiety that they're feeling. So I think it would be really important for Ohio State to score early, to start fast. If they're able to do that, I like their chances in this game. But all in all, we still have plenty of time before Ohio State and Texas kick off on Saturday. As I mentioned at the start of the broadcast, we had Steve Sarkisian's comments today from Austin. We'll have Ryan Day tomorrow. We'll have some players later this week. So there'll definitely be still plenty of more coverage to come as we prepare for that top 3 showdown on Saturday. But that's going to be it for the live stream here tonight. I have been your host, Chase Brown, joined by Dan Hope and Andy Anders. Thank you for any and all people who commented on the YouTube chat, commented in the forum. We look forward to more of these calls and more of those, answering those questions in the future. One thing to make note of is that this will be our last live stream during the week. As we move into the season, we are going to transition our live stream schedule to Sundays at noon. So our recaps of the previous game will be right around the corner. As soon as those games end, you might as well just get ready and hop in the YouTube waiting room, because we'll be coming to provide some comments. We'll definitely have lots of coverage.
They'll have
here.
time, because most of the games are going to be at noon. So they'll
That's right.
They'll have about
That's right.
They'll have about 20 and a half hours after the game.
Yeah. But if you want to get into the waiting room and just wait for us, that's good too. You know, you can just have some fun. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us, guys. We'll be back around later after the Texas game to recap what should be a great showdown in Columbus. For Chase Brown, this is Dan Hope and Andy Anders. Have a good night.